During our church fast, one of the mornings I was doing my readings, and a particular scripture in Isaiah jumped out at me that morning, and I felt like God was really speaking to me about our church in the times that we are in right now. And the scripture was talking about people being added to our number. And I pondered that for the day, and then the next morning I went to have my quiet time again. I felt like God said, you need to go back, you need to read that verse again. And so I did that, and then I shared it with Peter later that day. I said, I feel like God's just really speaking about this particular verse. And then that week I shared it with the elders and shared it with our staff. And it really impacted me so much that particular Sunday morning. I was in the prayer meeting praying, and I felt like God was like, you need to put out more chairs for the more people. And that morning we did need to put out more chairs, which had been happening for months, week after week for months. And now obviously we've changed the seating around just to make it a bit easier for people to find their places. And now we're trialing things with communion to prevent traffic jams up the front. But it was interesting because the day after that Sunday, I was at another church that morning, and the pastor turned to me and she said to me, Annika, God is bringing people to your church. God is going to bring a whole lot of new people to your church, and he's moving you into a new season. It's a time of change. It's a time of new season. And then she went on and she talked about how it's important that there are new wineskins for the new wine. And I thought that was really interesting because it was just after that, or around that time, that we heard from Justin and Helena that they were stepping down as elders. We're about to farewell, well, not farewell, but thank Amy and Stu. And so we were aware God was moving things. God is moving people. God is moving different ones in different places and positions here at church. But God is bringing us into a new season, and with that new season comes change. And for some of you, when Lyle asked who loves change, a whole lot of you were probably really excited, like, yes, there's change, there's things happening here. Yes. And for a whole other bunch of you, you probably thought, oh no, I don't like change. There wasn't warning about the change. When we changed the seats, I had people say, you should have warned us the week before that the chairs were changing. I was like, I'm sorry, we've been pondering it for a while, and then we just did it. Change can be a difficult thing for some people, but I want to challenge us that God is building his church, and God is changing things. God does bring change in our lives, and God brings new seasons. And I feel like right now we're coming into this new season. And God is building his church, but he asks us to be his hands and his feet, to co-labor with him to see his church built. And I want to challenge us today with how are we doing with building the church with him. During the fast, I also felt that I was to share this particular message, which is from Nehemiah. I happened to be also reading in Nehemiah during that time. And I feel like I've been carrying this message for weeks. And as some of you know, the last 2 weeks have been incredibly challenging, really, really hard personally for our family. And so thank you to those of you who know and have been praying for my family at this time. But during this time as well, I've also been carrying this message, and I just feel it's really important that I come and I share this morning some keys from Nehemiah that he did when he went to build the walls of Jerusalem. So turn this morning with me to Nehemiah, and this message is called Building Together. Building Together, and I told Lyle that this morning, and he began to laugh, and he told me what he's preaching on next week. So I've decided we're actually doing a mini-series between our big series, because we didn't know, but God is at work. God is talking about building at this time. So we're here in Nehemiah, and Nehemiah wasn't a king. He wasn't a great orator, but he was a humble man who loved God, and he was a man of prayer who sought God's face when things happened. And he was a man who brought people together to rebuild the walls that had been left in ruins, that were burnt and crumbled to the ground. God is calling us to build the church, and it's not for our glory, it's not for our namesake, it's to be done humbly, it's to be done with Jesus at the center of it all. And it's not because we're anything in particular, but it's because God is doing something and he's calling us to play our part. Nehemiah was living in the Persian city of Susa when a relative came to him from Jerusalem. And Nehemiah asks, how are the Jewish people? It all started with one question: how are the Jewish people? And this is the reply he gets, Nehemiah 1 verse 3. And they said to me, the survivors who are left from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and its gates are burned with fire. Nehemiah hears that God's people were distressed, vulnerable, and at risk of attack, and that they are losing their identity. And right now, people all around us in our lives, they are broken, they are burnt, they are distressed, they are vulnerable, they are attacked, and they are also losing their identity. So I pray that we would respond as Nehemiah does here. And his response is that his heart broke. He could have said, man, that's really rough. That really sucks that the walls are in ruin and that the city's in a really bad way. Someone should really do something about that. That could have been his response, but it wasn't his response. In chapter 1, verse 4, it says, so it was when I heard these words, then I sat down and wept and mourned for many days. I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. This is how Nehemiah responds. So my first point this morning is fasting and prayer is the foundation. When Nehemiah heard these words of the state of the city, his heart was broken, and he broke down and he cried out to God. He interceded to God on behalf of the people, and he fasted and he prayed. And it's amazing what happens when we fast. And in this book, Nehemiah turns to prayer 11 times. He does incredible things in this book, but everything he does is from a place of prayer and a place of humility. And for us to see lives changed in our community, to see people's hearts healed and identities restored, it will come from a place of prayer and it will come from a place of fasting. And I know we've just had our time of 10 days of fasting, but it doesn't just need to happen once a year. God calls us to fast over and over and over in different ways for our people around us. 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and forgive their sin and will heal their land. So are you praying? Are you praying that God will come and heal his people? Because prayer is the foundation of the church. And when we pray, we see lives changed and we see opportunities open up before us that we could never have dreamed of. And we realize that we are part of God's solution in this world. Nehemiah was the king's cupbearer, and he continued in that place that God had for him, as that was key to his calling. And God has put each one of you in particular places. When you pray, God can grant you favor and open up opportunities for you. But are you ready? Are you expectant in your workplace, in your school, wherever you are during the week? Are you expectant that God is going to use you? My second point this morning is courage will lead to provision. Courage will lead to provision. As the king's cupbearer, God grants Nehemiah favor with the king. And the king not only lets him travel to Judah, but he also gives him letters for safety and also wood from the forest to build the gates. But the king didn't just offer these things to him. Nehemiah had to ask. And you know, there is a time for each one of us to pray, and there is a time for each one of us to fast, but then there is a time for us to move into action. And sometimes that action means that we need to have courage. It means we need to have boldness. It means we need to ask. It means we need to speak up in situations where we wouldn't normally. God builds his church in amazing ways through each of you, and often with the gifts and the abilities that you are using outside of these four walls during the week. Nehemiah 2 verse 8 says, and the king granted them to me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Nehemiah knew where his provision came from. He didn't go, man, look at me, I've got these great gifts and I've been such an awesome cupbearer that now the king is going to grant me this favor. No, he says it's because God's hand is upon me. May we never forget where our provision comes from. Point number 3 this morning is be aware of the holding time. Be aware of the holding time. Nehemiah had been in Jerusalem just 3 days. And in Nehemiah 2 verse 12 it says, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. How amazing is that? What my God had put in my heart for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding. Nehemiah, he hadn't told anyone. He hadn't told a soul what God had put within his heart, the calling, the desire, the purpose of why he had traveled there to Jerusalem. He held those things so tightly because he knew that there was a time for him to keep things in his heart and then there's a time to speak. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 7 says, there is a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. And in those times of holding, they're a time of prayer. They're a time of contemplation, a time of assessment and planning before the Lord. And there are times when God will speak to my heart and he'll whisper things in those moments. And I know it's God speaking, but I also know that it's something so precious that God's saying, I want you to hold this, Annika. And it might be days, it might be weeks, it might even be months before I even tell Peter, hey, this is what I feel like God is saying. And, it may be a very long time before I even share it here from the pulpit. This morning, me even sharing this about this urgency that I feel like God is saying about the church and where it's at in the new season, I'm purely sharing it because I feel like God is nudging and he's saying, now's the time to speak. But sometimes we need to know what is the difference. When is the time to hold these things that God puts on our hearts and when is the time to share them? Sometimes people want things to happen fast and sometimes they will. But a lot of the time there is wisdom in the waiting and in the prayer and in the planning. Point number 4 this morning is be aware of opposition. The time came to share what God was saying to the people. And in Nehemiah 2 verse 17, it says, Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and we will no longer be in disgrace. Verse 19, but when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is that you're doing? They asked. Are you rebelling against the king? They hadn't even begun to build. They hadn't even put like one stone in place to rebuild these walls. And already they're being mocked and they're being ridiculed. Opposition comes even at the very beginning stages of what God calls us to do. In chapter 4, the wall is being built finally and the opposition gets stronger. Verses 7 to 8 says that there were ones who heard that the walls were being restored and gaps beginning to be closed, that they became very angry and all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. That is what happens when we begin to build what God says, I want you to build. And I thought it was interesting in here, it talks about the walls were being restored and the gaps beginning to be closed. And on Wednesday evening, we were praying as an elders team, and as we were praying for the church, and it just came out of my mouth, God, fill the gaps. Fill the gaps. And I felt like God said, I want to fill the gaps that are in the church. But to fill the gaps, years ago, my dad, he taught me how to paint wooden joinery. Like in our old house, we had a lot of wooden windows. And sometimes Pete and I drive home past other houses, and they're beautiful weatherboard houses. And I'll say, oh, look at that house. I love that house. It's like a doll's house. And he goes, oh, would you love a house like that? And I say, yes, but imagine painting it, right? Because when you've painted weatherboard and when you've painted windows, wooden windows, you appreciate brick houses with aluminium. Anyway, that's a side point. when you are filling the gaps in the wooden joinery, it is not much fun. I hate it. I hate the prep work. I hate the filling and the sanding and the filling and the sanding and the priming. And then you finally get to begin to paint and it begins to look good. But you know what? There's a lot of filling that has to take place first. And God is saying right now we need to fill the gaps. There's gaps. Look, there's gaps all over the church. There's gaps in ministries. There's gaps in teams. And God's saying, you know what? I want to fill the gaps at this time. That is what we're called to. Later in Nehemiah 6, there are accusations and distractions to pull Nehemiah away, which happens when we're building God's work. So what's distracting you right now from doing God's work? What's pulling your focus away from God's house, from being at church, from serving, from leading? There will be opposition. There will be people who don't get it and don't understand, who are like, man, why are you at church every week? Why do you go every other week? Surely that's enough of God. Why are you going out on Wednesday nights? Why are you at band practice on Thursday nights? Why are you at a prayer meeting early? Why are you doing these things? Why are you giving? There will always be opposition when we are building the house of God. But yet, this is what we are called to. Nehemiah has a response when the accusations come, and I love this. Chapter 6, verses 8 to 9, it says, I sent him this reply. Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You're just making it up out of your head. You know what? Sometimes people say stuff, and I just think, that's not even true. That is such a great summation of it. You're just making it up in your head. It's not even true. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands. Now strengthen my hands. You know what? Nehemiah, he knew what the truth was. He knew the schemes of the enemy. He knew the accusations would fly. He knew things would be said. He knew there would be rumors. But yet it didn't discourage him. He knew, man, if they can't discourage me, they're going to try and hope I get worn out. But I'm going to say, God, strengthen my hands. There is a mighty prayer right there. Lord, strengthen my hands. There is often opposition that comes. You know, when we, a little while ago, we decided that we would open up our church for the other church to meet in the afternoons here, which actually today is their last church meeting here at the river. Pete and I are going along to their service tonight. But it's been an amazing blessing. It's been a blessing for us. It's been an amazing blessing for them. But when we opened that up to this other church to come and meet here, there were others that were not so happy that we did that, which is bizarre. No one from our church, but from other churches, they would say to Pete and I, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Why would you let them come and meet in your building? What are you doing? And at that moment, we were reminded of a win for the church down the road is a win for us. And that is a motto that we say as a church all the time. Now, you can say it, but do nothing about it. But we did something about it. And I'm so glad we did. But isn't it interesting? We can do something, even that we feel like God is really calling us to do, that we feel is biblical, I believe is biblical, but yet there can be opposition. There can be discouragement in those times. So are you ready to withstand opposition? When people accuse you of things or believe things about you that aren't true. I learned a long time ago that God is my vindicator. God is my vindicator. You know what? When you're in leadership, people will say stuff. They will say crazy stuff. Stuff that isn't true. And you can try to defend yourself, but it's not worth it. And at some point, I just realized, you know what, Lord, you are my vindicator. And at some point, the truth will come out. And even if the truth doesn't come out, it doesn't matter, because God knows my heart. And he knows my motives, and he knows what is right and what is happening. God is your vindicator. Letting people can mean that things don't always go smoothly. But you can always come back to God and say, but God, I'm building your church. It's okay. You are my vindicator. My fifth point this morning is don't build alone. And this chapter is about chapter 3. Now, chapter 3 is a chapter that many people just skip over. It's kind of like when you read genealogy, in the Bible, and you're like, oh my goodness, this one's the father of so-and-so. And I confess I do skim sometimes. But I did not skim this chapter because I got to this chapter and I felt like God said, Annika, this is the chapter. This is one of the most important chapters in Nehemiah. And I'm going to read you sections of it. Chapter 3, verse 1. And you're going to have to forgive my pronunciation because I'm going to really muck this up badly. Okay. Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. Verse 2. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zachar, son of Imri, built next to them. Verse 3. The fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hassenaah. Verse 4. Miramoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakkoz, repaired this next section. Next to him, Meshullam, son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabel, made repairs, and next to him, Zadok, son of Baana, also made repairs. Verse 5, the next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, and it goes on and on and on, verse after verse after verse, and all these people are named for what they did in the building of the walls. And you know what? When God calls us to build, he doesn't call us to build alone. Now, Nehemiah may have had the book named after him, and he deserved to have the book named after him. Because, man, he plowed forth, he took that vision, and he ran with it. He withstood the opposition that came to him. But as well as that, he said, it's not about me, it's about every single one of these men and women that came and built the wall. And some may look and think this is insignificant, but it is not, because it's about every single one. God rarely calls us to build his kingdom alone. He puts us with others. God uses the most diverse group of people to come together to serve. He had priests, craftsmen, city officials, men, women, bachelors, business leaders. He even had a perfume maker, if you read the whole chapter. For many, building wasn't their primary call or job. And too often we get too caught up in our own preferences and what we think we're good at. And yet God is like, I've put a section in front of you to build, just build that thing. That's what he calls us to. You know, there were whole families that built the wall, if you read through this chapter. But there was also another man, I think it's about verse 30, who's referred to as the sixth son of so-and-so. He helped build the wall. His siblings didn't help, but he did. And I want to encourage you, sometimes you may be the only one in your family that comes to build in the church. But don't be discouraged. God sees the one, and he loves that the one comes to help and to build. You know, there was a cost to building the wall. Business people lost money while giving their time to build, but they knew it was so worth it because of the blessing they would receive from God as a result of the time that they gave. Some of them that came to build the wall, they weren't from there. It says they were men from Jericho, Gibeon, and other places. They weren't going to personally profit from the building that was taking place, but yet they came because they saw the bigger vision of what God was doing. You know, saying and doing are two very different things. We might want things to succeed, but to actually do it is another thing. You know, we might want a great kids ministry for our kids to go into week after week and having it available for new families coming in, but serving in it and being on creche might be another thing entirely. Wanting worship on a Sunday is one thing, but being at Thursday night band practices is another thing. Wanting people to feel welcome is one thing, but standing out on the car park in the rain some weeks or being on coffee and turning up early is another. You know, for Nehemiah, discovering the call God had for him to build, it all came from one question. How are the Jewish people? And sometimes we just need to ask one question. Where is there a need? Where is it that I can serve? Where can I put my hand to? And we do that section which is in front of us. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you. And lastly, point 6 is build with integrity. Build with integrity. And man, this is like a massive passion of mine. Nehemiah didn't just get a wall built. He served the people with character and with integrity, and he did it in a different way from those who had gone before him. In chapter 5, the people are poor and going hungry, and they're being taxed. And Nehemiah not only instructs the people to care for those who are struggling, but he points the finger at himself and to those around him to be generous and to look after those in need. He leads by example and he models how to live. And Nehemiah notes in there how he knows how the governors that had preceded him, how they had placed a heavy burden on the people. They had taken silver, they'd taken food, they'd taken drink from the people and left them with hardly anything. They had been treated so badly. And Nehemiah in this moment, he is faced with a choice. What sort of leader would he be? What sort of person would he be? He knew how it had been done before, but in this moment he made a conscious decision that he wasn't going to be like those who had gone before. He was going to treat the people differently and make sure that that happened within the ones working as well. And there are different ways to build the church. And you can build something huge and you can build something amazing and shiny and mighty and powerful, but sometimes there is a very, very huge cost. And sometimes the cost is people that get hurt in the process. And I want to say that that is never okay for people to be hurt in the process of a church being built. Having character and integrity must always be a priority for every single one of us. I've seen over the years how leaders can treat others. Authoritarian ways, using things like guilt and fear and anger to get things done, but that is not the way the kingdom should be built. You know, cracks will appear and the foundation will not hold it. And I think in the last couple of years, God's been cleaning house and he's been revealing things. And it's got to be a new time of people treating one another really well and treating one another with honor and respect and love as we build the church. And as a church, there are ways to treat one another. And those ways we should be doing exceedingly well, and we should be modeling those ways to one another and to the next generation which is coming up as well. If I can have the band up, that would be great. You know, the wall that was built had a deep meaning for those who lived there. It brought security, it represented their identity as a people, and it protected them. And building church means a lot more for us than a building. You know, it's about God. It's about Jesus. It's about sharing Jesus with others in the community. It's about seeing kids growing up to know about God and have such an amazing, strong faith. It's about our young people having the most incredible relationship with God that is so real, that they can sit in their classrooms and being surrounded by people going through so much, they know that God is with them and that God will speak through them to share with others. And this can only happen, though, when we each pick up our tools and we build the section of wall which is in front of us, when we build the church in the way that God is calling us each to build. We are to fill the gaps. The church is growing and people are coming along and they're wanting to know about Jesus. They are asking questions about Jesus. They're coming along, they're like, man, I don't know if I believe this stuff, but I want to know more about it. And we need people who are like, put up their hand and go, you know what, I'm happy to disciple. I'm happy to do a hair group. I'm happy to walk alongside that young person, that young girl that wants to know these things. I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to walk alongside that couple whose marriage is just in shreds at the moment. I'm happy to be that encouragement. I'm happy to do the hard yards. I'm happy to take the meals to the people who are struggling and who are unwell. And for some of us, it might mean more time in prayer. And it might mean more time in fasting. It might mean a time of holding. It might be that time where God is speaking to you so clearly, but you know it's not time yet. And God's saying, I want you to hold this in your heart because I'm going to do this thing. But now's the time to pray into it. Now's the time to plan. It might mean being aware of opposition and being prayerful and wise and responding with integrity, no matter what comes our way. It might mean a change of priorities. It might mean coming to church for the prayer meeting at 9:25 on a Sunday, which is an awesome time of prayer. It might mean serving in the kids ministry. It might mean serving on the worship team. It might mean greeting people. It might mean visiting people. It might mean pastorally caring for others around you or being in a connect group. I want to encourage you, if you're here and you're coming each week or you're just beginning to come, I want to encourage you to come and to belong. Because it's different looking at the wall than being a part of the wall. And we get to be a part of the church. We don't need to just watch the church happen. We get to be the church to one another and to those who are out there who are looking for hope.